Is this our last one of the year?
Oh, wait.
This is the last one, right,
Welcome.
Mark?
Welcome to our financial town hall. Just Ask Jen. Thank you so much for joining us today for our studio audience and for those that are online. If you're in the building, then you know the joke. So um, we want to welcome you. This is our last financial town hall of the academic year, not the year. And we've got some good topics and some good company that we're talking with and about today. So just as a housekeeping measure, uh, if you are interested in joining us on Blue Jeans, the link is on the website. If you are interested in joining us on Facebook, or if you are joining us on Facebook, you are welcome to submit your questions on Facebook and we will get to them in real time. And then if you're amongst the many and you'd like to come down and ask a question in person, feel free to do that as well. We'll be here for an hour talking. Let's see who's in the audience, who is actually, I'm sorry, in the house today. I am joined by my colleague.
Eve Bolton, board member.
That's our history book.
And I'm Jennifer Wagner, the Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer. Welcome, everyone.
All right. So tonight, of course, we're talking about money. And I know this is stressful for you, this time
Not
of
at
year.
all. I love talking about money.
Ooh, especially when it's not our money.
She just doesn't like giving it away.
She's very fiscally responsible, though. And so we're going to talk again tonight about the budget, central office, any other burning questions about revenue, but we're just going to tie everything in together.
Yeah, so when we were talking about what to talk about tonight, we were receiving questions, and there's still a lot of confusion over the budget target. So I'm going to try to explain how we get to the budget target and why it's lower than it was for this year. So, Rob, if you'll flip to that first slide.
We got a new screen, too. Loving
know.
that.
There we go. So we set the budget target based on the 5-year forecast. So if you recall from previous presentations, all 613 school districts in the state of Ohio have to file a general fund 5-year cash forecast in November and in May. And so in November is where we set the budget target, because that's the beginning of the budget cycle. And what this slide is showing you is the darker bars shows the revenue, while the gray bars show the expense. And then the resulting yellow line is the cash balance. So when you see that the revenues are less than the expenses, you dip into that cash balance. And so this is a way to help us do our planning and maintaining, controlling our spending patterns. Because we don't have the ability to go out and do bingos and car washes to raise revenues, or do stock splits, or sell more diapers or cars, right? The biggest way we can increase revenue is to increase our enrollment, although only half of our revenue source is dependent on the size of our enrollment, because property taxes don't change with enrollment, right? So the next slide, Rob, I'm going to try to explain before you flip to or you go ahead and flip to the Google Sheet if you don't mind. This is going to be an interactive slide.
How we like it around here.
So when he gets there. So as I said before, it's all about cash, right? So we operate on a cash basis. We recognize the revenue when we actually bank it and receive it into the bank. And we recognize the expense when we actually pay the bill, not when we incur the cost. So what I'm showing you here is, can you make it a little bit bigger, Rob?
Got older eyes, Rob.
Yay. All right, so what I'm showing you is actual results from fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. And if you recall, we're on a June 30 fiscal year end. And I'm showing you, this is the cash that we start with. So we'll start with the first year. We have $108 million on July 1st of that year, of $108 million in cash in the general fund, only the general fund. We took in $621 million in revenues, and we paid out almost $13 million in payments. That's salary, vendor invoices, supplies, textbooks, curriculum, anything that comes out of the general fund. And so we ended the year with $116 million in cash. That becomes our beginning cash balance of the next year, right? So the next year in fiscal year 22, we took in 559 million, and you'll happen to notice that the revenue is significantly less than the previous year, and that's because the state foundation formula changed with the biennium budget. And they eliminated what we call the pass-through funding for tuition. So the children that attend charter schools, community schools, Ed Voucher, Autism Peterson, those students used to be included in our enrollment counts, and so they would generate revenue, and then they would turn around and deduct it off as a tuition expense. So our revenues went down, but so did our expenses.
Did our enrollment go down at all? Was it pretty constant?
The internal district enrollment was still growing at that time, pre-COVID. So in fiscal year 22, we took in 559 million, but we spent 569 million. So our cash balance went low by $10 million. So this year, we started the year with $106 million in cash, and our revenues are expected to be up prior to last year for a couple reasons. One is the triennium value update, property tax values went up a little bit, so generated a little bit more income, but mostly because of the state foundation formula. If you remember, it was being fully funded, phased in over a 6-year period, so that it's showing you the increase in the state funding in when they're in the way they funding it, the phase in of the full formula. And our budget is $613 million, which means our cash goes down to 66 million, which makes me very nervous. So what I'm showing you below that is that the ODE has a rule. They want your cash balance to be greater than 2% of your prior year revenue. And so I'm showing you is that calculation is $11 million. They want to see that $11 million in the current year and then the 2 years in the forecast. So that 3-year window, they want you to show positive cash and enough money to stay out of ODE trouble. So what I'm showing you is if with the $613 million budget this year, and if we kept it at 613 and didn't make any reductions, you can see that we get dangerously close to that $11 million in 24, and then in 25 we actually almost run out of cash. So Rob's going to show you, he's going to change in fiscal year 24 that 613 to 565. So we're matching the expense to the revenue. Oh, no, next column over. Put that one back, yep. So if we leave it, yeah, so it'll recalculate. So our cash balance goes back to 66 million, and you can see we stay positive for the next 3 years, for the next 2 years after that. So if we just maintain and keep a balanced budget, balanced to our revenues, we will avoid going into a negative cash position. And you can see that it's not like we're not overly conservative with our revenues, because our revenues are continuing to grow throughout the next 2 years based on the phase-in of the formula and small increases in enrollment. So that's why we're taking the budget, and the 613 million, the reason it was much higher than the revenue was several reasons. One, we had a lot of delays in COVID that, from the strategic plan that we hadn't finished out yet, so we knew we needed to finish funding that. Two, the preschool expansion has outgrown the $15 million set aside. That this year was a $4 million. So the budget combined from CPS and CPP, the Cincinnati Preschool Promise, our combined budgets were 19 million versus 15 million to support the kids that were qualified. And so we're dipping into some prior year cash savings for that. So that's why the 613 was higher than we'd originally intended the budget to be. But the agreement was we would return back to a balanced budget. It's going to be very difficult to do. So does that make sense? I'm going to pause right there. You can go back to the slides if you don't mind. Does that help explain why the budget target has to be lower than the 613?
I think it explains it, but I think if we could just belabor it just a little bit longer,
Okay,
I think
go
that
back
would
a
be
couple
helpful. From a standpoint of, you mentioned that we're balanced to our revenues. Well, we made a conscious decision. Actually, I don't even believe it was the current board necessarily
Correct.
that decided to balance to the general fund revenue, particularly, right?
Prior board was the board that decided to go above the annual revenues
Hmm.
base because we were funding the strategic plan.
Yes. And I believe that when we first talked about the 5-year forecast, it was determined even then, and that was maybe at the very beginning of this current board or right before this current board, and when the transition of administration too, the idea that we had to get those numbers down because that we were willing to raise it for that 1 year, particularly if we made a commitment to lowering it in the following years.
Correct.
So it's other boards that have tried to do that to be fiscally responsible, but we've always had a balanced budget. Right now, it's the budget, general fund budget to what would be the general fund portion of the revenue. Is
Correct.
that right?
Because
Okay.
otherwise you're going to run out of cash and you're going to have to go back to the public for a new levy
Thank
for
you.
operating funds.
And we've generally been making a commitment, and this is previous boards as well as this board, to not have to do that is whatever, I mean, to delay that as long as possible as part of the plan, but then also delay that as far as we can. But in doing that, also not necessarily having any reduction in force. So those are giant, big commitments that have been made, and still ask of you and everyone to be fiscally sound and be able to somehow navigate those waters.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and the other issue is that ESSER helped us not to have to reduce force.
And that happened in the Obama administration as well,
Correct.
where there was an influx of federal dollars, and I think that was very, very helpful. So we have to take advantage of it. But then to your point, and to the good doctor's point before, hey, when you do that, you have to then prepare for when the money's not going to be there. And you've
Correct.
been doing that as well.
Correct. Yeah, it's not sustainable money, so you can't, people get used to spending at that higher level. So we've been trying to be very deliberate about what that money is used for. So shall we pause for any questions about that? Because otherwise I'm going to switch to the central office budgeting.
No questions?
Okay.
So I have a question. Can we go through a scenario where if we don't go to the 613 for next year, but we delay that to 25, what does that look like?
So, sorry, Rob, you're going to have to go back to the Google sheet.
I'm just being the devil's advocate to say like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what if because and I was just saying that because we have ESSER funds that are restricted. If you don't know what that means, go back to one of our previous shows. But what if we delayed that reduction, that significant, or we just made it go?
Okay, so
steadily?
if you take the fiscal year 24, so column E, and you get a minute. He's trying to do 12 things at the same
Sorry,
time.
Rob.
Column E, make that one minus 613 again. And then go to column F and make that one minus 595. You still run out of cash. And our revenue, I mean, it's all forecasted data. It's all based on what we know. The state funding formula could change again because it could change every 2 years. So it's hard to forecast that far into the future. I will tell you this model does not include any cost of living increases for salary because we haven't negotiated anything yet. It does include step increases that are already defined in the collective bargaining agreement, but not cost of living increases. So there are some other challenges. So there's $3 million, this year, there was $3 million left in the student wellness grant that helped fund our resource coordinators. Not all of them, but $3 million worth. So we used that. Well, that grant's gone because they rolled it into the state foundation formula and is now subject to the state share. So instead of getting, last year we got $12 million, now we're getting $3, but it's reduced by 41%. So that $3 million of the resource coordination cost is going to come back to the general fund. So that's going to add to that big difference. And any COLA increases that we negotiate will help that. So that's why we're trying so hard to find the monies that are having the biggest academic impact, and things that aren't working as well, we stop funding. So,
But I think that the good doctor's right to ask about what about next year, or what about the timing of all of this? And largely because what we have to figure out is that the following year, FY25, is more difficult in all likelihood than FY24 is financially, because we
Yes.
really don't know economically
right.
what's happening. We really don't
Inflation,
know about
right.
the state. We know that ESSER will be gone, and one hopes that there'll still be, at least somebody in the federal administration that's going to be interested in funding urban schools and what have you, because frankly, the state is not that interested in funding us. We're still perceived by the state as being wealthy because of our great value and our corporate structure and our properties and what have you. But I mean, we are considered the same as a Wyoming school district, and it falls to our residential folks, very frankly, to kind of come up with that. And that's very difficult. Also, philosophically, the change in administration, with the idea of a strategic plan that's nearly done, except for the broad idea of vision, mission, and future. The reality is this could probably be just like we added for the previous strategic plan. It might make sense to, do as much as we can to have a baseline in anticipation of the next strategic plan. It's all about messaging.
One thing that could really help us is that the 613 that's budgeted for this year, if we don't spend it all, we end up with more cash at the end of this year. That 66 million could grow. We could start out with more cash, and so that gives us a little bit more room. We always underspend our budget because we think we're going to do all these great things, and we do great things. We could just never do enough of everything we've planned for, right? Now, there was a lot of vacancies, and so everybody's kind of counting on the savings in those vacancies, but we already had an estimate for that in the budget to get us down to 613. So if we go above and beyond our estimate, that'll help save us more cash, but we already anticipated the vacancy rate in that budget. But if the current year, if we only spend 600 million instead of 613, that's $13 more million that'll float into next year. That'll help us. And so that'll be updated with the May forecast, which we're starting to work on now. And so we'll anticipate what we think our final spend will be by June 30.
And this budget process that we've had, kind of a mixture of old and new, if you will, approaches. This is, and people have been watching these Ask Gens, have been able to see this, where there's been some really big questions asked about the assumptions we make or the projections we make, and whether or not there are things that we could do at the very basic fundamental, whether it's class size or whether it's Title I and how that's used. There's been, through this process, there's been really great questions that have been asked.
Yeah.
I don't think we've all answered all of them, but indeed the reaction as we've gone through, I think has had a lot of participation in trying to figure it out. I think that's healthy.
So I'll tell you a really cool story from lunch today. I was in the lunch line waiting for my food, and somebody approached me, a staff member, said, "Hey, I was working this weekend. I had to write a paper on school finance." And so she was like, "I need to call Jen and ask her some questions." And then she goes, "Oh, I'll go to the website and look at Just Ask Jen." And so she was able to write her paper based on the revenues forecast, or the town hall that we had, and the whiteboard. And then she linked her whiteboard to her paper. So I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that is
Cool
cool.
story. So
See, I mean, it's
thanks,
working.
Erin, if
Yeah,
you're
it's
listening.
working. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And actually, I think, maybe call me a little optimist, but I believe that when we put data out here like this, we can, if we educate the community on what we're actually going through, it will be that much easier to get levies passed when we need them. It will be that much easier to educate our staff on why, if we have to make cuts or if we have to add programming and it's got a certain dollar value, why we're doing that, because
Mhm.
they would be informed about, or at least aware about how we got to there.
Right.
So that's my thinking.
So it's easy to forget that because I live, eat, and breathe and sleep this stuff 365. It's easy to forget how when a crop of parents or community members that don't do this work every day, or they're new to the district, don't know our processes. And so one of the learnings that I've had through this experience this year is we're going to create a budget web page so that starting in August is we're going to start putting out, these are the plans, these are the formulas we're going to be using, these are the timelines, and then everybody can just be directed to that one page on anything related to building a budget. And so I'm hoping people will use that.
I think they will. And I actually think, again, like DPS has historically been trendsetters, I think that will be the start of something wonderful across our state that we're doing that other people aren't doing to help them. I've shared our Just Ask Jen link to my cohorts and said, these are the cool things that we're doing to educate the community regarding engagement. And they're just like, oh, wow, these are really cool. So I know we've got a couple extra views because people are really, really interested in it. And to be quite honest with you, it's information everybody needs, especially in the state of Ohio. Information is there.
All right, Mark, do we have any questions?
All right, this one's a little bit specific to funding of technology, and they basically are asking, how is the district funding multiple devices for students who, either break or lose their computers, with the consideration that Title I schools cannot, charge kids to replace their computers. So I'm going to start there. She had a few other questions, but I'm going to leave it at that first.
So I'd be happy to answer that question as the former CIO of this district before becoming the CFO. I just left the alphabets. We struggled for years because technology, computers is always the first thing they get cut out of a budget process. And so we ended up having, I can remember when I took over as a CIO, we had schools who had Apple computers that were 13 years old. And so instead of having a budget that could get every year, I started involving the district into operating leases. Can't cut a lease payment, right? It's already a commitment. And so we got into a refresh cycle. And so they do refresh every 3 to 5 years, depending on the device. And so I think we spend about $15 million a year on devices and refreshing them. And no matter what school you're in, what grade you're in, you have a device. It might not be the exact same device, but I know the younger crowd, kindergartens and first graders, I think use iPads, but everybody else gets the device. So did I answer your question?
I believe so. I think it was really also the question is from an equitable education perspective, if a child has a computer or a child doesn't have a computer, and I think you've answered.
Well, so what we found is that we gave everybody a device, but they didn't always have internet access at home. Right? And so we were able to solve that problem with a lot of partners in the community who donated money, and then the district also helps fund free Wi-Fi access for those families that need it.
One was just a general question about what is being done for funding with transportation.
What is what done?
They just said, what is being done for funding with transportation?
Well, they're still doing their transportation audit, and the board's deliberating on different avenues of transportation services. So until all those decisions are made, we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be, but we know we can't continue to spend $50-some million a year. So there's $9 million that are sitting in the ESSER budget that helped us to return to normal services after the closures. So that's part of the whole central office budgeting cycle.
And we're going to talk about central office, so stay tuned for that one.
Yeah.
I think there was one part to that question that I want to clarify. The person asked, I think, can we charge students that are in Title I schools for their device? Are we not charging students in Title I schools for their device?
We don't charge any students for their devices. If they lose them or break them, or there's some policies surrounding that. I don't remember what the details are.
But no, I just wanted to clarify,
Right.
no students are being charged for their devices, Title I school or not.
Right.
But if you damage a device, then you have to
Right.
pay for that.
Now, the district did invest in some software that can track those devices. We actually recovered a device that was in Africa because we have geofencing around our schools so that when it leaves the boundary of where it's supposed to be, they can track it down once it pings on the internet. Or if they can't find it, they replace it. It's part of that, the cost of that contract. So that's good. Trying to be good stewards of all of our assets, not just the dollars.
Could I, if I could, about the idea that you are saying that every student at Cincinnati Public has a device.
Correct.
Does every school in Cincinnati Public have art and music?
Yes.
Does every school in CPS have physical education?
Yes.
Thank you.
Maybe not as much as we would like to see, but yes,
Well,
every student
yes.
has access to PE art and music. And then we've, several years ago with the My Tomorrow initiative, made a huge investment in digital learning. So that's where that was born. So always going back to My Tomorrow.
I'd sure like to see My Tomorrow return as a plan and as a way of thinking, and really as part of the high school transformation that the superintendent's so interested in. Because I think that was transformative in its early years. So it's something great. And then you were part of that with the previous superintendent. And can you just talk a little bit about getting rid of the silos? Because that was all part of My Tomorrow.
Yeah, so the whole initiative started with the high school redesign because the high school graduation requirements had changed. I can't remember what year this all occurred. It's been a while now. But we were trying to figure out how do you transform high schools to meet these new graduation requirements. At the same time, looking into the future of what careers are out there, how could we prepare our students for those new careers, emerging careers. And so it really became focused on when we realized that if a child owns their career or the thought of their career and their academic path to get there, they're much more likely to be successful. And then there was some research out there that if a adolescent child connects with an adult in the school, they're more likely, I forget what the statistic was, you might remember, but it's tremendously higher to be successful in college. And so we started those plans, and we had representatives from all parts of the district come to this meetings. It was every Tuesday morning. And everybody checked their egos at the door. It was probably the highest performing team I've ever served on. It was really great. And we did great stuff. And so we started My Tomorrow. Hashtag My Tomorrow, Our Future. And we realized, had an experience with my own children, and when they were in college, they were taking accounting 101 class. And so they would call me and they'd say, hey, Mom, we need a homework hotline. And they'd go to the student union, they get all on their laptops, and they would call me at 9 o'clock at night, and I would help them through their accounting homework. And but they were using software, and so they would do the software, they would do the problem, and they go, no, that's not the right answer. I'd say, well, did you consider this? And so what I realized is they were getting instantaneous feedback, and that was part of their learning cycle. And so that was just an epiphany for me. Maybe it wasn't for professional educators, but so we tried to get that instantaneous feedback and those tools in the hands of the students so that they could continue to learn and grow. It's an exciting project.
I as a mom of children well, they're not children now, but they were children in the schools in that time. It was definitely innovative and transformative for our students that went through school when we had that. My Tomorrow Vision 2020 was just really, really good for our kids to be able to, as you shared, take some ownership in their education. And we used to do data rooms with data talks to kids to let them know where they were so that they could see that. And it was good because they could find out where they were and then seek out assistance. But that was their initiative, and it was really, really good.
The first year, excuse me, the first year I remember our plan was to give every 7th and 8th grader a device. and that we started at 7th and 8th grade, and then we were going to the next year go to 9, 10, and the next year go to 11, 12. Well, the first year was so exciting that 9, 12 insisted on being part of the second year, so we had to move a lot faster. Then we went down to 6, and then 5, and then 4. We kept going downward, so that by the time we got to COVID, I think we only had like another grade to go. So I think we were well better poised to respond to on remote learning than a lot of other districts.
Thanks for saying that, because I think we do miss that as to, as rough as COVID was and as hard as it was to see any good come of any part of it. I do think that we were better poised for what was about to happen to us than many other districts were.
We were better prepared with our students, but not necessarily our adults. So and not
Grown
every
ups
teacher
always
or
screw up
paraprofessional.
education, so there you go.
Okay, so any more questions before we move on?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a follow-up, and I think it was, this based on the students losing devices. Is there a rationale or was it a cost to provide teachers with carts versus giving students who may damage or lose their? Is there, one way or the other?
So I think they estimated some loss and damage, because we all make mistakes. I've dropped my phone on it. I can't tell you how many times, but there is a document the families sign once they take possession of those devices to say that they are responsible for damage and loss. And I think we probably waived enforcing that during COVID years, but we're getting ready to go back to it again. I don't remember the details of what that costs are or anything.
If I could ask, for our devices, what are the limits? Even though every student may have one of our devices that we've supplied, and it may go home with them or stay or whatever, what are the controls? Because I think that's part of the
Right, so the
concern,
district,
too.
I don't remember the name of the software, but there is software on there that prevents them from getting to naughty places or downloading naughty things. I don't think any software application is perfect, but there is a lot of monitoring that goes on. And when they're in the classroom, the teachers can look, see what their devices are doing. And so we're required to protect our students. And so we have special software to help us do that.
And it's continuously being updated every day.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, we've had some very creative people. So
Well, we've got some really smart students
Yes.
too. I have to say this. I have one of my sons cracked the Wi-Fi code for the school with some other friends as well, before we were giving out devices so readily, because they're smart. Our kids are really, really smart, and so they are figuring out how to bypass things and
Right.
and do coding. They're learning coding,
Right.
and so.
Well, I remember when we first went remote and people were using a lot of Zoom. People were breaking into Zooms and doing naughty things then. So, yeah, there's always smart people out there.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
are.
So,
Any
Okay.
other questions?
okay, so let's flash to the next couple slides.
It's 6:36.
Timing.
We're doing
Okay.
great.
Okay, so the central administration process. So we're getting ready to kick off, or actually we started training today on the software. We bought some new software about a year or so ago, which is very user-friendly, but the central office hasn't been trained on how to do it yet. So they're starting that now. But we've told them we're going back to zero-based, and I say modified because we preloaded the staff. So we didn't want them to have to enter their 700 people. We just preloaded whoever was existing now. And then there's a method for them to ask for changes to that. But so we say zero base. So everything non-personnel is at zero, and they're going to have to build their budget from the ground up. They're going to have to tie it to the board goals and guardrails. It's hard to say when you say it fast. But and then the process becomes the central office manager builds their budget based on data, and we want them to link it to the priorities. And then they're going to have to defend their math. So you can't just say, I had $10 million last year, I'm going to get $10 million this year. We're going to want to see, I have this project is this much, this project is that much. They're going to have to defend it, because in the 30 years I've been with this district, but when we get all the budget asks in, it has never been below the target, ever. And so we have to go back and shave things. And so we need to know exactly what what to cut, what the priorities are. And so we need to know exactly what projects cost what. So once they submit their budget through the software, the budget and grants team goes through a quality control checklist. So they have a checklist to make sure that people didn't forget to budget for supplies or mileage and stuff like that. And then it goes to their leadership team member, executive leadership team member. And so they have to approve both the personnel and the non-personnel. And then once that's done by May 5th, we take it back and consolidate it all into reports and start analyzing it. And then we could take it to the ELT so that we can start deciding how we're going to balance. So hopefully by June 10, we'll have a good recommendation for the board to review in a public setting. Okay, next slide. We'll get there. So here's some examples of what we mean by central administration. I didn't name everything because there's a lot of sub teams, like curriculum. There's multiple teams. You have your core curriculum and your instructional equity and early childhood and fine arts, that kind of stuff. They all have their own budgets, but they roll up to a larger curriculum budget. So superintendent, the treasurer, HR, general counsel, I won't read them all. But those are some samples of this is, and everything we do, we're doing it for the students, right? Or to serve adults who serve students. Like payroll, for example, we pay the staff who teach the children. And so we try to be as fiscally responsible and as productive as we can be so that every dollar that we save can go back into the classroom. So next slide.
Before we get off that slide, can you go back
Okay.
one, Rob? I just want to note two things that are there at the bottom on the right: family and community engagement and Project Connect. Can you talk about Project Connect for those that don't know?
Yes, Project Connect is a department that helps students who are experiencing housing instability, I think is the new term. And so they help them get enrolled, they help them get their buses, they help them with instruction if they need it and services. Rebecca Beach does a phenomenal job managing that crew. And this isn't an order of priority, it just happened to be how they popped into my head when I was typing.
No, I got you.
So in the family and community engagement, that's the group that manages all the resource coordination work and helps families engage with the district partners.
I just wanted to make sure that people knew.
Thank you. Is
We
there anything
have
else there?
those.
Then positive school culture,
Mhm.
they help with the discipline and school social worker. They manage all the school social workers. So
Can I ask a question about that? And I know that over time, over several, a few superintendents, there's a great effort to make sure that the central administration budget is not huge
loaded.
or bloated,
Yes.
or that we are assigning and assuming that many things that the central budget is actually going out to the schools.
Great
And that
segue.
makes sense for messaging. It also is, as you say, our purpose.
Mhm.
But I wonder sometimes, let's face it, I mean, can everybody there have something to do with whether or not somebody's passing the third grade reading guarantee? I mean, when you think of all the things that we do, even in the goals and guardrails, virtually everything is, the centerpiece is instruction. And we may say that's our number one job, but it would seem to me that the central office also has other things that are about the district.
Yeah.
Whether it's facilities or whether it's the transportation, all of it somehow is getting the kids to and from school and in a nice building. But still, you kind of wonder if do we lose the purity? Do we lose the granular aspect of each of these departments and what they really are trying to do? If they're always connecting to what's happening at the school or trying to. I just think that's hard.
Well, I think there's a fine balance between focusing on that third grade guarantee. So for our department, we're paying bills that support third grade reading, right? We're paying the third grade teachers. We're paying for the curriculum. We're paying for the devices and the utilities and the air conditioning and the garbage removal. But so we can stay focused to that level of granularity, but it's important for us to stay focused on being efficient in our operations as well, so that we're doing that in a good way. Does that answer your question?
No, I don't disagree. I just think that it's hard. Um, it's hard to kind of maintain the purity of each of the departments and the things that they have to do. If indeed we've got to, it's got to get it out to the schools, we do, but still, is there even a different word? If it's support or.
So yeah, let me go to the next slide. Maybe that might
Maybe that'll
help
help?
you. Yeah,
Okay.
I think. So this kind of helps the central office teams, that each department, and I struggle with purity because nothing we do is done can be done in isolation. We are so interdependent on each other in departments. So for success, right? So for a central office budget, they have to do three different things. So they budget for their office. So, my staff, my payroll team, my accounts payable team, and then we have office supplies, and I pay for the software license for the financial transactional system, professional services. But in addition to that, there are some departments that also fund people that work out into the schools. So those are called central budget school allocations. And those are like the facilities group budgets for the custodians, but they assign them out to the schools. Positive school culture budgets for the school social workers, but they assign them out to the schools based on formulas, and the one-on-one pairs and psychologists. Those are some examples. For this year's budget, that's $43 million. That sits on top of what the schools are already budgeting based on their enrollment and their school budget formulas. The third part of that is they budget for things that are cost allocated, so they provide services to the schools like utilities, transportation, curriculum, and the technology support. So those are cost allocated out to the schools on a per pupil basis, but they're budgeted centrally. So it's incurred out into the schools, but it's funded centrally. So when people look at the central office administration, it's not necessarily just central office bloat or the bureaucracy, but they're actually they're budgeting and spending services to serve those kids and staff members that work in the schools. And so we haven't done that third part yet because we're just kicking off the central office budgeting. So does that make sense? Does that help?
It does a little bit. I think I'm having a little transportation I can kind of see because we can get that down to how much does it cost the total number.
Right.
You can make that per pupil, but like utilities
So
and curriculum, how would we do that?
So let me give that an example. So we spend $10 million a year, $10 million a year on electricity. Duke Energy, $10 million a year. 65
buildings, right? Or 66.
67, right? So we have the Ed Center, we have Iowa Street,
Okay.
and then we have a couple other buildings. But that utility is used out into the buildings. So when you want to look at the total cost of running a school, you have to look at the whole cost of running that school. So we just allocate it based on the number of students that are in that building. So we take the $10 million, and if I have 600 kids in one school, then I'm going to divide the $10 million by the 36,000 students and multiply it times 600 for that building, and then we're going to expense that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I just thought it would be like if you have a Withrow, a West High, and a Clark, and their utility expenses. I thought it was like their expenses per month are, let's say, 10,000. And one is 11,000. I thought it was based on what their usage is. I thought it was kind of like at the school level versus per student.
They could probably do that. They could probably do that if somebody sat down and analyzed every utility bill and calculated that. It's just easier to do it per pupil.
So they don't send it to us like that. They don't say, okay, this site is this much. This site is this much. They
Yeah,
just give us a bill.
it's on the bill. Yeah, it's on the bill, but and so you could do that for the electric bill, but you're not going to do that for the garbage bill or the water bill, or maybe the water meters could be done that way. In curriculum, they do it based on the number of, like, if they take the English language arts curriculum and divide it up by the number of kids or the books that they send out there. They actually do it that way. So it's not always so easy. We could probably break out transportation based on the number of people that ride each bus to each school. But that's a lot of work. And I don't know if it's, the cost of diminishing returns. Do we want to get to that level of granularity or just do it by per pupil?
I'm gonna let you go.
I'd like to follow up to that, and this slide does help. And I wonder, I think that kind of granularity, a lot of work, and certainly can't be done the next 2 weeks. But I think it would not be a bad idea to be able to say, instead of the social workers being controlled at the central office, how many social workers does that school have? And to know actually how much each school costs us, whether it's Duke Energy, whether it's Cincinnati, Greater Cincinnati Water Works, or whether it's how many textbooks are in there, or how many kids are being transported. To me, it almost fits within, and I know we have this constant debate about centralization and decentralization, but from a messaging standpoint and from a getting to the point of what everything really is costing, the disaggregation of it by school, I think could be obviously not a lifelong project, but I think that I think that it's doable.
It's not as easy as you think it might be, and it would take an incredible amount of work to do that with a lot of human resources to do that, to go through that data.
Well, that's,
Most
we know we are
organizations-
over hiring this year.
No, we're not over hiring. We are not over hiring. We are eliminating that terminology from our vocabulary.
I'm not. I like it.
Most places out in corporate world that have multi-sites, they calculate an overhead cost. So they lump it all together and they figure out based on square footage or usage or whatever. It's I don't know that, and I'm not saying I won't do it, but I don't know
When you
how.
retire, Jen, we're going to hire you to fix that.
I'll be the chief of data geek.
I just really honestly
love
think,
it.
I mean, I didn't mean to open up the can of worms, but in a way I do, because I have driven past some of our buildings at 11 o'clock at night. Lights are on.
Mhm.
And I think from a budget standpoint of my own house, like turn off that light. You know, I'm looking at a lot of, but I think it's worth, and it's almost our responsibility to look at how much are our buildings costing us, that we can see. We've got 1,300 students at Withrow. We've got 3,000 students at Walnut. What is the real cost of operating that building? And then almost compare that to what is the budgeted amount. So again, for me, I'm looking at it, if the budget is 615, I'm rounding, if that's 615 million, are some schools costing us more to operate? Are some school, and I mean on all levels, curriculum, transportation, this building is costing us, we give them maybe a budget of 5 million, but in actuality with utilities, curriculum and all of that, it's really costing us 10 million.
Right.
And over all of our sites, does that add up to 615
So,
million?
and that's where we're trying to get to with that. And we started building that out several years ago with our general ledger account segmenting. And so now we have a system that's sophisticated enough to be able to do that. We just haven't gotten to the level of granularity that she's talking about, but we're much, much closer.
But is it going to be really that hard? And I'm wondering, I don't know how they're billing us from a commercial standpoint with regard to water and utilities. I think that's probably the biggest
It's
thing.
got to be by unit.
We get a bill that just says, hey, it's $1 million a month. I mean, how does that work?
No, I'm sure the bills, I mean, I haven't seen a utility bill in forever, but I'm sure there's a lot more detail we just have never set up the purchase order to deal with that way. Because you're going to have to take, instead of having a purchase order that says we want to buy $10 million worth of electricity, you're going to have to determine how much each line item at each school is going to cost. Set up the purchase order so when the invoice comes up, you match those lines. We have a 3-way matching system, so it has to be you have to plan it at that granular level. But what I say we'll do is we'll spend some time this summer looking at how much more granularity we can get moving forward into the next cycle. So then we start it that way.
But can you think 3 things that you couldn't do that way?
I think transportation would be really hard because we'd have to look at every child that rides a bus every single day.
Right.
Metro and
Right.
Yellow. And they don't have data systems that can do that.
Well, there's another issue, is that just like certain cable and whatever companies weren't providing internet, and maybe too, certain transportation companies don't have the technology that we can even track with a card where our kids are on Metro or Sorta. So yeah, but see, if we wanted that, or
We couldn't
you
get.
could make some demands.
I
should
wanted to
be
look
able to
at
be-
the cost of choice, transportation
Right.
wise. We couldn't get that information out of the system.
No,
So
they don't want you to know it.
Well, I mean, I think honestly that just to bring up a small piece of what the kids at what we're talked about with regard to Metro, they were wanting to have the app be used because Metro does have an app for regular customers, and they track from that app when you get on the bus. I mean, it's all accessible to you in the palm of your hand. Your card is on the app. Why can't our kids get that as well? But to the point of being able to track it, not necessarily per day, but per unit dispensed. So I'm thinking if we dispense 400 cards to, and I keep saying Withrow just because that's one of my favorite schools, but if we dispense 400 cards, we don't have to go down into to disaggregate that much, but we've dispensed 400 cards, so we could assume.
And we'd actually know.
Right,
Right.
right,
So, yeah, it would be harder. It's harder to do on a yellow bus,
sure.
right? So that's an area that we would provide a challenge for us.
Well, we do have an annual agreement coming up with Metro Sorta, and maybe this
Mhm.
need for technology
Yep.
and access to us being able to hold everybody, our kids and our vendors accountable
Accountable.
in our schools.
Okay, can you flip to the next slide?
And it's 6:54.
Oh, wow, it's going fast.
Good.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought there was another slide. Here we go.
There you are.
So this is how we're asking the central office, based on the board goals and then the guardrails and those sub-measures on, we want every line item in our budget to be tagged to one of these things. So either the spend that you're going to do is for literacy or for math or, you know, effective systems, transportation, right? And then we also have this normal operation somewhere under there. So, you know, like payroll, for example, would be a normal operation for us, right? So not everything is a strategic move. Sometimes it's a compliance move, or sometimes it's just a bit normal business continuity. But we want to make sure, because I want to be able to report out to the board and to the public, these are the things we're investing our money on, and this is the impact it's having, right?
Mhm.
So how much did our effort for the third grade guarantee year for literacy, how much of our spend, what's the return on investment for that spend?
Sure.
And so, but the only way to be able to do that is if you tag it while you're doing the budget. And so this is going to be a lot more work initially for people to think through. It's going to be frustrating and it's going to be hard, but we're committed to doing that. And then everything we do it with a lens of equity.
Right. Jen, with the things that they can't attribute to the goals and guardrails directly,
Mhm.
would they just count that as, like you mentioned a minute ago, overhead? Or is it operational cost? What would they classify it? Because much of what they're going to be putting together is not going to have a direct impact.
Right, that's why we had there's a code up there for normal operations. So our general ledger account code is segmented so that it tells the number sequence tells us things about whether is it salary, is it structural salary, is it primary instructional salary, or is it baseball, right? Baseball equipment or baseball services or whatever. But our account code gives us a lot of that kind of the whys and the whats. What we're trying to say is the board wants us to focus on literacy. So what are we spending in our normal budgets supporting literacy? So you have to get to the lowest granular level of what you want to report out at. So we wouldn't call it overhead. If it's just overhead utilities, they would put it under normal operation. Okay, so we're trying to think of, you know, like the new world language curriculum adoption that would fit under one of those categories.
How did you come up with the categories? Is this
They
just
came from your board goals and the guardrails. Those, you remember that Saturday workshop that we had? They were up there, and those words that were the bolded words.
okay?
So, and then we added, you know, the effective systems. We added those areas of priority as what the superintendent put in her priorities with the board. Yes, supporting the goals. Yep. Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Any questions?
Okay.
Yeah, we have a couple, and I'm going to try to compress these a little bit because
Okay.
we do have a limited time. One was asking about if there a possibility to do a breakout of like spend, if we looked at a dollar bill, for instance, and we've talked about doing a whiteboard. So you may want to let the audience know, we want to be able to do it at the district level. Like if you looked at a dollar, what, if it was mental health, if it was all the different costs that go into supporting a child. If
Yes.
you looked at it a dollar, we do it at the district level, and can we do it at the school level? So maybe you can share
Yeah.
that with this community member.
So I've been trying to come up with a visual on how do you do the dollars for core instruction and then all this wraparound services that individual children get. The hard part with that is every child is different and they all have different needs. And so it's hard to come up with a graphic that would solve that. And so I'm working through that. It's a great idea. And I'm hoping the man behind the microphone is going to help me get there.
We'll work on it.
Yeah.
The other one was they were asking for a pie chart, but I think the pie chart would be, you could probably explain it, you know, the difference in the school-based cost budget
Yes.
versus the central office budget.
So the pie charts and the graphs are all going to come starting on not April 24th, the May meeting, May 2nd. And when we start reporting out the budget as a consolidated budget, and I'll start breaking out all the pretty charts and graphs and stuff like that, determining how much are we investing in athletics, what's a school versus a central, and all that stuff. We just finished the schools. We're still wrapping up some, you know, items that have come up. We've learned of an issue this morning. There was an error, and so we're fixing that. But the budget changes almost on a daily basis as we refine and we refine. And so the central office hasn't kicked off yet. So keep watching because we'll get those charts out there soon.
So if you could base like past experiences on an annual year, what is the typical central budget in terms of a ratio to the overall district budget?
So central administration is usually between 5 and 6% when you remove the things that are budgeted centrally but spent out into the schools, right? We have a district fixed budget. It's about $26 million. That's our debt payments, our casualty insurance, and the Fund 34 transfer, which is our building maintenance fund that we're required to transfer $500,000 of value every year to maintain the pretty buildings that we have.
One was, and they were saying it's controversial, but I think every year we look at administrative salaries, and is it on par with other urban districts around the country? So it's not as seen as something that's extraneous or a burden to the taxpayers. So I don't know how you want to answer that, but I think the question is, are administrative senior leadership salaries on par with other districts, industry?
I would just, I haven't looked at that recently, so I'm afraid to say yay or nay, but I don't think that we're completely out of line with other urban districts across the country.
Fair enough.
So it sounds like, not to cut you off, Mark, but we probably need another financial town hall because what I'm hearing is that people want to see the school
Or,
information.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll plan another one for May so that we can kind of
Okay.
come back. I think it's fair to come back and give some pretty pie charts and some data, and then we can always look and see what salaries are since
Sure.
someone asked that question. But I also want to make sure that we say, people keep saying that this is the treasurer's budget, that the treasurer's controlling all this money, the treasurer sets these salaries, et cetera, et cetera. But really, you just kind of manage the budget of the superintendent. Is that right or no? How
so I
would you
manage the
describe it?
process of budgeting. Is the superintendent, the content of the budget is driven by a lot of things: state law, federal law, collective bargaining agreements. Derive a lot of the school budgets because that's all the staffing formulas come out of the collective bargaining agreements. 98% of them do. And then the superintendent builds content of the budget based on the board's direction and guidance each year and a strategic plan. So while I manage the dollars and I look for financial efficiencies and making sure that we're financially compliant, I don't do a lot of decision making when it comes to what we spend the money on. I just need to make sure that it's for proper public purpose, which the definition in the state of Ohio is it advancing the education of a child? And are we following federal and state laws?
Wanted to make sure we clarify that because
Thank you.
I keep hearing people say,
I know.
the treasurer said we can't have this because the treasurer is controlling the money. And it's like, well, hold on. Kind of not fair.
Right. Yeah. That came out when, they started asking about the Schedule E and equity and all that. And I don't do that. I don't develop those budgets, so it's hard for me to answer those questions. But we have budget managers who are well trained and they manage the money, just like a school principal manages their school budget. Our central office manages their budget. But it goes through an approval process, so everybody's marching in the same direction.
You just mentioned Schedule E. That's a central
It's a
budget.
central budget, yes. It gets allocated out to the schools, but it's part of the central budget allocation.
We need a whole session on Schedule E.
Yeah.
Good gracious.
Yes.
That continues to be a
And
question.
we're working on trying to figure out a per pupil model, but there is a team that's working on that and process improvement.
And I was going to tag to what you said, that a lot of times people are saying the treasurer is recommending a cut to the budget, or the superintendent is recommending a cut to the budget. When in actuality, you've been saying these are the forecasts based on the state funding model, and these are things for the board to consider. So you may
Right.
want to just clarify that for the community of where we are in that process and how we share that information out.
Right, so I'm recommending a reduction of the prior year spending, which represents about 7% of the budget. Because when you talk in dollars, it sounds like a lot, but it's 7% of the budget. To maintain the cash balance for the next 3 years, so the board does not want to go back to the public to ask for more property tax levies. And so in order for us to do that, we have to maintain our cash balance, or if we go into fiscal emergency, which is when you go into a negative cash and you have to borrow money from the state, they come in, they take your decision making away from you. And so a lot of the decision making and the power that we have, the authority we have locally, will be overridden. And so our class sizes will go dramatically up because we have lower class sizes than just about anybody else in the state, according to our formulas. And so those decisions on how we spend our money will be taken out of our hands.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope, and we are 5 minutes
I was
over.
gonna say,
Oh,
we're
wow.
we're a little over time, but I
Yeah.
want to make sure that we get it.
Thank you, everybody. This is great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about having another financial town hall, but if we don't, we stop right here. Thank you so much to my colleague, Board Member Bolton, and to Jen. This was a great idea, and we got this kicked off. And to the wonderful studio audience, and to Rob and Mark, thank you so much for all your support. Board Member Bolton, do you have anything? We do have a meeting tomorrow.
Yes, we do have a meeting tomorrow. We have a budget, finance and growth meeting starting at 10:45. There's also a board policy meeting starting at 9 a.m. So be sure to tune in, so to speak. Nope.
Those tomorrow. No, they both were moved to the 14th.
Well, whatever. We just care about 10:45 anyway, so
That's
there
right.
you go, because you're all money folks watching this.
We're talking money at 10:45 tomorrow. So tune in. If you need the link for Blue Jeans, it's on the website. Thank you all so much and have a great night.